Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right into something that literally every agency owner or project manager has lost sleep over at some point, and that is planning mistakes. When you're talking about white label WordPress development, top-tier partners, like the folks over at Viral Chili, will be the first to tell you that planning errors are, without a doubt, the single most expensive category of mistake you can make. Why? Well, because they basically operate like a silent tax on your project, just quietly eating away at your margins from the inside out. Think about the delayed reaction of poor planning. A flawed or maybe kind of ambiguously defined requirement in week one probably seems like no big deal at the time. You might just think, hey, we'll figure it out as we go. But that exact oversight, it is inevitably going to generate a super painful, margin-crushing revision cycle around week 6. It's honestly like a ticking time bomb that travels the entire length of your timeline before it finally goes off. So, to help you diffuse those situations before they happen, we're going to quickly walk through 5 key areas of project planning: the white label context gap, the scoping illusion, the complexity trap, content management and completion, and finally, the true cost of late discovery. Starting right off with Section 1, the white label context gap. Okay, to really understand this, we have to talk about something called ambient project context, which is really just a fancy term for water cooler chat. It's the accumulated project knowledge, your physical proximity to the client, and all those ongoing casual conversations. Like overhearing your sales team talk about a client's weird quirks. Internal teams use all of that to intuitively fill in the blanks of a brief. But when you use a white label development team, they are completely cut off from that ambient context. They literally have to work strictly from exactly what they are given. So naturally, an internal team is going to compensate for those little planning gaps, but a white label team, they simply cannot. Even industry-leading partners like Viral Chili emphasize this heavily. An outsourced team can't save your project if the core requirements or performance expectations were never actually defined on paper. Basically, if it's not in the brief, it doesn't exist. Planning quality isn't just a nice-to-have bonus, it is entirely your responsibility. Moving right along to Section 2, the scoping illusion. This brings us to mistake number 1, and oh man, we've all been tempted by this. Treating a really beautiful design mockup as if it's a complete development brief. A mockup only shows what a site should look like under absolutely perfect conditions. If you only hand over design files, you are essentially forcing your developers to play a massive guessing game. How should this grid behave on a weirdly sized tablet? What happens to this cool animation if the user scrolls way too fast? By making them guess all that, you instantly eat up the time and cost savings that outsourcing was supposed to create in the first place. Luckily, the fix here is surprisingly simple. You just need to complete a standard development specification template alongside your design process. Document the responsive breakpoint behaviors, clearly describe what those interactive states do, and lay out some implementation flexibility guidelines. By just doing that, you instantly transform a static visual reference into a completely actionable, unambiguous build brief. And the best part? It really doesn't extend your planning phase by much at all. Now, also falling under that scoping illusion is mistake 3, scoping without understanding the hosting environment. Because visuals are one thing, but infrastructure is a whole different beast. If you skip gathering the hosting constraints, say you don't check the client's PHP version or their memory limits, your developers are just going to build for a perfectly assumed environment. And then launch day comes, and you find out the client's actual server is a decade old. Suddenly, you're staring down the barrel of some incredibly expensive mid-build rework. All right, Section 3, the complexity trap. Which leads us perfectly into mistake 2, under-specifying integration requirements. This is exactly where confident yet incomplete specs cause agonizing discoveries later on. If you scope out a CRM integration without verifying API versions or without checking if the client even has the login credentials handy, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. Premium white label agencies like Viral Chili see this all the time. Projects where an entire architectural approach has to be completely tossed out halfway through just because of these hidden integration roadblocks. Listen to this stat, it's wild. Nearly half, 48%, of all delayed web development projects point to integration complexity discovered after scoping as the primary culprit. Just let that sink in for a second. Almost half of your timeline blowouts could be completely erased if integrations were just scoped properly from day one. So what exactly do you need to do? You've got to gather these details before any code gets written. You need the API documentation links, you need the actual client API credentials in your hand, a strict list of the specific data fields passing back and forth, the direction of that data flow, and clear expectations for error handling. Knocking this out up front will entirely prevent those mid-project integration surprises that absolutely destroy agency timelines. And that naturally tees up mistake 4, setting timelines without technical input. Because there is a massive and sometimes honestly comical difference between a commercial estimate, which is usually based on what an account manager excitedly promises just to win a pitch, and a technical estimate, which is grounded in the cold, hard reality of the code. Promising a client a 2-week turnaround for a highly complex WooCommerce build just because it sounded good in a meeting, that creates immense unfair pressure. Always validate timelines with the technical team before making promises to the client. Moving on to Section 4, Content Management and Completion. Mistake 5 is a big one, completely omitting content management requirements from the brief. Yes, a website has to work perfectly for the visitors, but you know who else it has to work for? The tired marketing team trying to update it on a Friday afternoon. If you don't clearly define their technical skill level, developers are going to build a backend that makes perfect, logical sense to a coder, but looks like a literal airplane dashboard to a marketer. The end result? A technically flawless website that generates an endless, frustrating stream of support requests. And that rolls right into mistake 6, failing to define acceptance criteria before development even begins. Look, if you don't establish exactly what done looks like objectively, then completion just becomes entirely subjective. Without a pre-agreed standard, you end up in this really bizarre situation where both the agency and the client feel they are 100% right, yet they fundamentally disagree on whether the project is actually finished. So to close things out cleanly, you've got to ditch vague words. Don't say the site needs to be fast. Specify exact Core Web Vital scores. Don't just say it needs to be working, list out verifiable user journey behaviors. Top-tier white label partners, again, like Viral Chili, absolutely insist on these objective standards. Because when both parties know exactly what done looks like mathematically, projects close with handshakes, not arguments. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the cost of late discovery. The cost of a mistake doesn't just grow linearly, it scales aggressively the further it travels down your timeline. Catch a missing requirement in week 1? That's maybe a simple 1-hour clarification call on Zoom. But catch that exact same mistake in week 6, now you're paying for developer rework and extended timelines. And if you discover it post-launch, oof, now you're paying with your actual profit margins and severely damaging a hard-earned client relationship. It all builds up to this one core philosophy. Planning mistakes in white label development aren't execution failures. Actually, they are failures of preparation that just masquerade as execution problems. Building some serious planning rigor up front guarantees that your outsourced projects are going to run vastly faster, cost significantly less, and consistently impress your clients. So before you package up your very next project, I want you to ask yourself, is your brief a true technical blueprint, or is it really just a highly optimistic guess? If you're ready to stop paying that silent tax on poor planning, it might be time to evaluate not just your briefs, but who you're actually handing them to. Are you partnering with a team that demands excellence, like Viral Chili, or just a team that says yes to everything right up until it breaks? Take control of your context and watch your margins absolutely transform. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy planning.